size, super simple recipes. Number 3, stew and dumplings. This base was given to me a long time ago by a lovely old lady, and it's foolproof and it works every time. And the basic ingredients we're going to use are carrots, potatoes, onions, some good veg stock regardless of what stew we're making, and a little bit of corn flour just to thicken it up. I'm going to have to obviously prep these, and I play a game of Russian roulette with the freezer, so I'm not exactly sure what meat we're going to put in it, but it works with any red meat. It's especially good with a piece of bacon or gammon, beef, lamb, any of those. If you're going to make it as a vegetarian option, then substitute the meat for some root vegetables, swede, turnip, whatever. So I'll prep these and I'll be back with you in a minute. Okay, I've diced the potatoes and roughly chopped the onion. The results of the freezer roulette turned out to be a nice piece of beef, so it looks like we're having beef stew with dumplings today. What I'm now going to do is just dissolve a teaspoon of corn flour. I'm getting it out of the packet, in a little bit of water, and that's only to thicken the sauce. We're going to dice the beef. I will fry it off in a little bit of olive oil. The method with this stew is that long slow cooking will draw all the starch from the potatoes. It will dissolve the onion, which will give you a nice thick sauce. Now I'm using veg stock for this. Two stock cubes will do for the size of saucepan that I'm using. Because this is beef, if you wanted to, you could substitute one of these for a beef stock cube. It's only for colour. If not, you could add a couple of drops of gravy browning or a drop of soy sauce just to give it a bit of a darker beefy colour. But if it's for anything else, for lamb or for gammon or bacon or pork, I would just use veg stock. So I'll dice this up and we'll get this right. Okay, the beef's frying off nicely. All of these veg straight into your pan. Break up these two a bit. Obviously if you were doing root veg for this, you'd have added those in at the same time. All of our beef goes in. And the olive oil that was cooked in, so we get all the flavour in there. Now we just pour on boiling water. We want it to be at least an inch over all the ingredients. Chuck that straight onto a high heat and bring that up to the boil. Boil, boil. The slow cooking method, you should find that all of those onions almost dissolve and the sauce will thicken, but we'll add some cornstarch just to give it a little bit of a thickness, mostly because my wife doesn't like stew with runny juice. The stew's now come up to a rolling boil, so we're going to add the cornstarch mix. Give it a bit of a stir around and get it back boiling again. Oh, hubble bubble toilet trouble. Once it's come back to a boil, you want to move it onto the smallest burner on the lowest setting possible. Lid on and leave it for 2 hours. The meat will be tender, you can cut it with 2 spoons. If you're making something like cowl, the traditional Welsh lamb stew, and you want to add stuff like spring greens or cabbage or broccoli or collie, cook this on that simmer for 2 hours, then add those and give it another half an hour, because if you add them now they'll completely break up and turn to mush. We'll sort out dumplings. While the stew is simmering away, let's make some dumplings. I don't tend to use measures, right. Heaped dessert spoon plain flour. Heaped dessert spoon of plain flour. Heaped dessert spoon of suet. Now, I've not used vegetable suet, so I don't know how well it works, but this is beef suet. Now, because it's plain flour, I don't use self-raising. I'm going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of bicarb, which should help them rise. Teaspoon of mixed herbs, because I like herby dumplings, but you can not bother if you don't want to. A good pinch of salt. This is the only part of the operation that you need to be careful with, because if you make the mix too loose, they'll fall apart when you cook them. I have washed my hands, they are clean. So little with that blend in. A little drop of water. You want to use the least amount of water that will give you a dough, because the more water you add to these, the more likely they are to break when you cook them. Eventually I'll get my hands in here. Let's see, does it need a bit more water? Tiny drop more. What I'm trying to do is pick up all the flour without adding too much water to it. Getting there. That's enough for 2 decent sized dumplings, which is enough for 1 person. Obviously just double up on the amounts for however many people you've got to do for. That should rise to at least double that size once it's cooked. And I'm going to pop those in the fridge until they're ready to pop in the stew. Dumplings. Okay, you want to give it a stir every now and again. You don't need to be too fussy. It's unlikely to stick due to the amount of liquid that's in there. I wouldn't bother to check the flavour and the seasoning until it's been in for about an hour, because as the onions dissolve, the flavours will develop, and then we'll test it when it's cooked after 2 hours. Okay, it's been just a shade over 2 hours now. Time to check the seasoning. Hope you've all had a nice beer or some gin. I bloody well haven't. That's not too bad. It needs just a touch more salt, which is good. I'm just going to check that this is perfectly tender. That's falling to pieces, so that's perfect. So I'm gonna, instead of adding some salt, I'm gonna add some dark soy sauce, just to give it a little bit more colour. I'll give that a quick stir. So, get it back to a bubble. At this stage, if you were going to add some softer green vegetables, I'd add them now. That'll give them about 20 minutes to half an hour to cook through to tender. But we're not bothering, so all I'm going to do now is take my 2 and we'll leave those for 20 minutes and we'll see what happens. Okay, let's hope this has worked, because I'm bastard Hank Marvin now. La 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 la. Beef stew and dumplings. Job done.